And there's also many other areas that are, if you go into Oakville, Illinois, there's a haunted, it's like a mineral spa kind of place. It's very haunted too. The Mineral Springs Hotel in Alton, been there for lots of years, haunted as the day is long. So there's all these different areas with all these different type of haunts. You have the woman who was the first woman ever hung, the other woman ever hung in Illinois, and and supposedly there's a ghost story behind that as well. And there's all kinds of neat stuff, it happens down here as far as the paranormal. The Seven Gates of Hell in Collinsville, Illinois. Suppose you drive through these different bridges or railroad bridges and stuff like that, and bike bridges, and if you go in the right sequence, supposedly it forms a portal to down below, down to hell. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of great stories for the paranormal in southern Illinois.
Make sure I'm rolling. We're rolling. All right.
Residual haunts. In these older places, you have people who lived in these houses for, all their lives. And generations of people would live here. In this day and age, we move around from place to place, different houses, apartments, different cities, different states, different countries. These people stayed in one place a lot, all the time. That's where they lived. And you see this also in places like England, where, places have been there for hundreds of years. So you've got all this energy. So you've got these people who've lived in this place for so long, they've left an imprint. And they're so into living there. This is their place. They just loved it. And so what happens is like there's an imprint of them left there. And they'll do the same things over and over, but they're not consciously there. Their soul is past, but that energy part of them that's still chained to that place, or just because they love the place so much, continues to do the same thing. You may, like a certain time at night, like at midnight, maybe they're always going down the stairs. You always see the same thing every night, same time, going down the stairs. You see a spirit, or you sense a spirit like that. So yeah, that's residuals, because they were just so tied to the place that that part of them never left. They're they're wherever they went to spirit, but that part of them is still there.
Can you talk a little bit about that, because people see her in the graveyard and things like that, we don't even know if she's there.
Right.
So
what happens with a lot of people when there are people who are so into either ghost hunting or, and you have so many people who have a lot of energy. I've done lots of work with people who are so afraid, or they have issues with drugs and alcohol, and they have all this energy, that they actually create spirits out of that energy. It forms outside of them. And they believe it so much that the things actually start to happen. It's like a spirit of some kind has been manifested out of their desires and energy. You get this a lot with people who have emotional problems, have addiction problems. They so want to externalize what their problems are that they create a type of being with that. And it's an energy form. And these people tend to be kind of powerful. It's like, people like me, if I could work with this person, I could, really help them become psychics and healers and all this other kind of stuff, because they've got this wonderful natural energy they can use. But until you learn how to harness it, it can affect you in that situation. It can affect you if you're a ghost hunter, that you will hear and see things because you're creating them out of your mind, and now all this excitement and energy you have.
Just in general terms, can you tell us, like, part of the documentary we talk about how old Southern Illinois is, and it's the oldest culture in Illinois. Can we talk a little bit about that, just in general terms, how Southern Illinois is old?
We must remember that Illinois in the 1840s was extremely thinly settled. The settlements were primarily along the Mississippi rivers, the Ohio, and the Wabash rivers. This is especially true 10 or 20 years previous. So at the time of statehood, the only population was along these rivers. So the earliest settlements were along. This is where the Reeds bought a farm at the government land office, which was to the northeast of the Baker Cemetery, where Betsy and Leonard are buried. The settlement, the territorial capital was in Vincennes, Indiana. The land office where much of our early lands was purchased was in Vincennes. In 1821, the federal land office had an office at Palestine. which was also plays into. I mean, the Reed farm was south of Palestine. He borrowed money from people in Palestine to finance this farm that he had bought from the government. The prairies of central Illinois were not considered suitable for settlement. It's only in the wooded areas of southern Illinois and on soils that were, there was a lot of thought if a soil couldn't grow a tree, it wasn't worthwhile. So anything in grass, and of course prairie grass that the plows had yet to be invented to break that prairie sod. So the first settlements were along the rivers of the Wabash River. And so we have some of the earliest settlement in the state of Illinois here. And there wasn't much north of, from Palestine north, there was very little. So.
And you live in the river community, right? Or where you are? Isn't that along the river?
I live in Vincennes, Indiana, across the Wabash River.
Okay.
Now, Vincennes has a history of its own. It was the first French settlement in this area. Some of the people from that settlement went across the Wabash and settled in St. Francisville in Lawrence County and then other places. So, I mean, that history goes back to the mid-1700s.
A lot of French people here. There's a lot of French lands that lie perpendicular to the river in the Vincennes area, also in the Reed's neighborhood. So these are lands that the federal government could not sell because they recognized those who had purchased it from the French government. That took a long time. The Reed's farm was only a half a mile or so from the Wabash River, very close. And things could be shipped from different points along the river. A lot of our early economy was based upon the flatboat traffic of local produce to New Orleans to be sold for cash.
I think it's an important event. So besides you guys, I don't see any, it doesn't seem like the county is really, takes it into account how important it is. That's my opinion. I could be totally wrong about this. What's going on there in your opinion?
In Palestine a few years ago, they had a celebration, and it was a Betsy Reed celebration, and they had a bed racing contest down the street, and about the story of Betsy Reed. Our local attorney, Roscoe D. Cunningham of Lawrenceville, publisher of the Sumner Press newspaper, for years he promoted a reenactment of the Betsy Reed hanging, thinking it was something that would draw attention to Lawrenceville and would draw a crowd to try to revitalize our community. That never happened.
It's a dark story. And maybe a lot of people didn't want to glorify a dark story. And that was when they thought she was executed legally and for the right reasons. Now, if you add that she might have been wrongfully accused, it's an even darker story. So maybe people didn't want to glorify that.
It just there was no cure for any disease around there. Life was hard, and if you look at the cemeteries, there are all kinds of kids. And even one of Betsy's defense lawyers, Augustus French, who became governor of Illinois about 18 months after the trial, and even after he's governor during the start of the Civil War, it was like a colic who killed his son, who was a doctor, and then a month later, the ex-governor is dead from the same colic in the same bed. And you look at Abraham Lincoln, lost 3 of the 4 children at that time to diseases. So, it's hard when you're talking about people this age, you won't say middle age. And I've had editors say, well, how could they be middle age at 50 when the average lifespan at the time was 50? Well, people still live to be 80 or 90, but it's because of the diseases that took out, that so many people died in their youth or on there. So death was a pretty common friend or visitor, not so much a friend at the time. It wasn't unusual to lose, everything. Like we're going through the COVID virus right now. That'd just kill everybody, and you had, it talks about things coming through. And a matter of fact, Betsy was hung almost a year after, it was quite a bit of time after was accused of the murder was supposed to have taken place. And the reason was she was taken to Lawrenceville, Illinois, and they had an outbreak of yellow fever at the time, so the judges would not come down, the judges and lawyers. At the time, every court, they didn't have they didn't have lawyers for the most part. They didn't have a judge that sat there. They rode the circuit. When you hear like the Ninth Circuit or the Eighth Circuit, each circuit had a judge, and they had lawyers.
Sorry.
Okay. Each circuit at the time had their own judges and lawyers and whatsoever. Usher Linder lived in Charleston, and they would do this circuit down here. Like Abraham Lincoln would do a certain circuit, and he did work in this circuit. It could have just as been Lincoln as a lawyer. And the funny thing about Lincoln is Lincoln took the most unlikely cases. He took a lot of times the cases he was the lawyer for the bad guy in a deal in lawsuits like that. But at the time, William Wilson was a Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time for the state of Illinois. But even William Wilson had to ride a circuit. And so his circuit was down here. I think he was from Carmi, was his hometown. So he would go here, and what they do, they'd hold court for 2 weeks. So they'd come to Crawford County, hold 2 weeks worth of court and take care of all the business, or however long it took. Then they go to Lawrence County, then they go to White County or Wabash County. So the judge just maybe once a year or twice a year, but they missed a circuit because of the yellow fever. So that is, and several people died of that too. We just didn't have any. Well, most antibiotics weren't invented yet, and even if they were, like for smallpox, you would cut somebody who died of smallpox and cut somebody, and that's how they tried to give immunization.
They're very tricky to use because you're holding them in your hands and they're moving depending on, the spirit or whatever you're trying to talk to is trying to make it move. They're just hard to manipulate to keep them straight, to keep them steady. I kind of think sometimes that a spirit or energy might come through you to make those dowsing rods move, similar to what actually happens with the Ouija board. And everybody doesn't like the Ouija board because of movies that came out back in the 70s, but the Ouija boards are doing the same thing. You're having energy come through you to basically move that planchette, just like they possibly could the dowsing rods. So dowsing rods aren't, they're interesting, but they're also very hard to keep solid and keep straight so you can do an investigation with.
Awesome, very cool. Are people asking for trouble if they're messing with spirits and they don't know what they're doing, or what's your feeling on that?
There's a lot of times people are going out with the intention of trying to locate a spirit or locate the energy in a building or ghost or whatever you want to call it. I always tell people, be careful what you look for because you might find it. If you're going out looking for something evil, there's a chance you might come up with it. You might find that. So I think a lot of that's intent. It's what you intend to do, intention to go out there and find, and what you're hoping to find. And you just got to be careful of what you're doing and just know what you're doing. Don't just run haphazardly into someplace and take any type of piece of equipment and trying to find a spirit, because you might get more than you bargained for. This is what's called the Frank's box. Frank Sumption made these years ago. He died a few years back, but he made about 180 of these boxes. Fortunately, I've been able to come up with quite a few of them. They scan radio frequencies, AM, FM, backwards and forwards, however you want to do it. And there's a thought that spirits can talk to people through these. and they scan at different rates. You can slow them down or speed them up. Frank made these basically with parts that he had left around in his house. He was just a fascinating individual. There's a lot of people that try to copy these, but what they do is you can go through and you can talk to different spirits. Every box was made individually, had his own personal designs on those. They're kind of interesting the way he did it with working on those, but he did about 180 of them, and I've been fortunate to have quite a few of them. And we've used them on different investigations. We had some pretty good luck with them. We talked to things, we've talked to people, we've asked questions that we knew the answers to, and we got the results that we were looking for a lot of times.
But if you look back here to this hill on the other side here, there's a location, and the people who lived there back in the day, and this comes from, second and third hand accounts, obviously, stated that they remember looking out and seeing lanterns come up the lane, and that they actually witnessed her being taken back here and buried. So, there's kind of an eyewitness account that she is buried at this location. So that's kind of cool, kind of a historical standpoint to know that, somebody actually witnessed something happening here. Of course, her gravesite's here, her grave marker is here too, so I don't know why she wouldn't be here.
Well, and another one of the stories too is they brought her here, but this is considered hallowed ground because of what she did. They say she's actually buried in the woods, that they wouldn't allow her to be buried in the cemetery. I've seen that before. I've heard that story too.
I've also been told she's buried around Heathville, where her cabin was located. So we've got 2 or 3 possible grave sites. Some people claim she's buried outside the Lawrenceville Cemetery, that they took her and buried her outside the cemetery because back in the day, anybody that was considered to be a witch or had some type of magical things they were doing, they were buried outside of cemeteries. They weren't buried with the the general population in the rest of the cemetery. So 3 or 4 different locations people claim she's at. I truly believe she's here. I think she got buried here by the family members. I don't know why there would be a stone here marking her presence. If you look at the tombstone, her husband is also buried here, which is kind of ironic, the one she killed. Yeah, she was accused of, killing him with arsenic-laced sassafras tea. That's how she killed him. And there was a big controversy over that too, of whether, did she mean to kill him? There's just a lot of mystery behind the whole story of Elizabeth Reed, and that's what makes it so interesting, the whole ghost story and the historical aspect, because there's parts missing to the story. You got to fill in the blanks, what happened here, and it's kind of just a neat story. I originally became interested in the Elizabeth Betsy Reed story. I was doing some research at the local library, and I uncovered, the story, and started researching, what happened with Elizabeth Betsy Reed and involving the hanging. Figured out she was the first and only woman to be hung in the state of Illinois, which kind of interested me. I thought, well, if she was buried in Baker Cemetery, there's probably a good ghost story to go along with that. So, I investigate all claims of paranormal occurrences and just any type of local folklore and legends. So I became really intrigued by the whole Elizabeth Betsy Reed thing. So we started, investigating the cemetery. About every weekend we would come out here. But to start out with, I didn't know where the location was at. I'd never heard of Baker Cemetery. I was all new to the story too. So I looked it up. We tried to figure out where it was at. Back then we didn't even have like GPS like we do nowadays, or Google Maps. We just had to go by old topographic maps and look for the cemetery. So we get out here, me and a friend, a buddy of mine, we were out here driving around. We couldn't find the cemetery, but we came upon this old house, this old like 2-story house. And we pulled up to this house, we get out, there's an old lady in a rocking chair on the front porch. And I go up to the house, and my buddy's like, you sure you want to go up there? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go up there and, ask this lady where the cemetery's at. She's got to know, we're in the area. So I go up there, and I said, about 5 yards from her, before I even get up to her, she goes, you're looking for Elizabeth Betsy Reed, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I am. I said, how did you know that? She goes, oh, I just know things. And I said, okay. I said, could you tell me where the cemetery's at? And she pointed me down the road, and said, you just go down here and make a left, and it's around the corner. I said, okay, thanks. So we followed the directions, found it, and that was the first time I was ever out here at the cemetery. And one of the strange things about that, there was 2 events that took place that day. We came out here, and when we came out here, we went to her tombstone. You know, it took us a while to find it. We didn't know where she was buried at out here. We looked behind the tombstone, and there's a sassafras tree about 2 feet tall growing directly behind her tombstone, which we thought was kind of ironic because that's how she killed her husband. You know, it was with arsenic-laced sassafras tea. So we, you know, that my buddy kind of freaked out about that, and we talked about it, and we ended up leaving and going down the road. And when we went down the road to leave and went around the corner, we still to this day don't know if we made a wrong turn. We're gonna say we made a wrong turn and just didn't go back the same direction, but we could not find the house where we stopped and asked that lady for directions. And we have looked for that location to this day, and I have never seen that house or that lady again. I'm not saying it's paranormal, but you know, we still cannot figure out what happened that day. You know, there's these reports of disappearing houses and stuff all over the place. Even Bachelor's Grove has reports of, you know, a disappearing house up in Chicago. So I'm not saying that's what it was, but you know, we still can't explain that to this day. But the weird thing was also we came back a night later to the cemetery, and when we came back, the sassafras tree that was 2 foot tall behind the tombstone was not there. So, you know, that's another strange event that took place, you know, regarding the cemetery and some of the weird stuff that's happened to us, you know, over the years. But another historical event that took place at this location that makes this whole area pretty haunted and paranormal you know, it's got a lot of paranormal activity due to Elizabeth Betsy Reed's hanging on the football field. And to top it all off, the high school, which sits behind us back here, there was a murder in 1952 of a lady named Georgine Lyon, and she was shot to death. She was shot several times in an English classroom in there. They found her laying in a pool of blood during the noon recess hour. So the whole story was she was gonna break it off with her boyfriend. They were gonna get engaged and get married, and she broke off the engagement, and he was mad about that, so he just came in and murdered her in the classroom. Nobody heard the shots either. You know, people reported hearing things, but they didn't know what it was because they'd all left for the noon recess. So there have been a lot of reports of paranormal activity come from within the high school from this event that took place in 1952. So, I mean, you've got a haunted football field, and you've got a haunted high school. So, you know, just a lot of strange events have taken place in this small little area. The paranormal side of this place, you know, we have done a lot of paranormal investigations of the Hudson Cabin area here and around this area. The actual massacre took place over here, kind of where there's some greenhouses you can't see over in this area. The actual massacre took place over there. We've had a lot of EVP activity in this area, electronic voice phenomena. We picked up screams, we picked up what sounds like horses. A lot of strange, you know, electronic voice phenomena activity here, which could be residual activity from the haunting or from the massacre that took place to cause the haunting. Because without history, you can't have a haunting, and there's a horrible history to this location. So there's a lot of stuff that takes place here. One of the stories, they have reenactments here every year. They hired a group of Native Americans, or tried to hire a group of Native Americans to come play the part of the Native Americans to do the reenactment. They got into the area, came up to the cabin area, and actually decided that they did not want anything to do with it. They said there was a lot of bad, you know, energy, bad vibes here. So they just took their stuff and left.